Good evening, readers. So I have finally finished reading this book. This is We That Are Young by Preti Taneja. I did say her name wrong in my last video, but I've watched a clip of her introducing herself, so now I know. I'm really happy to be shelving this book because it's been a long read for me. I started it in December and I had to stop at various points when I got quite frustrated and quite tired with it. And I'm going to leave till the end the reasons why I got frustrated with it and focus for the start on just about the book itself and what makes it good, because it is a good book. This review is from my experience as a reader. It's not an academic review, it's a personal review, and I think it's not exactly fair to the merit of the book because there's a lot that goes on in this book. This is a very intelligent book and I'm just going to review how I interacted with it and how I experienced it as opposed to looking at its actual quality per se. So this book is a very new book for me. It was published by Beggar Press in 2017 in this rather trendy minimalist edition, and I got it as a birthday present quite soon after it came out. It's set in India, and I'm about to give you a spoiler, but it's the exact same spoiler as you will get from the blurb, so I'm not sure whether it counts that much. It says, "We That Are Young" is a modern day King Lear. I initially interpreted that as like, this is some big family drama about power and all of that, but no, you realise quite soon that this actually, if you know the play of King Lear at all, you realise that this is King Lear. The plot points are the same, it's just that the story is being transposed to modern day India instead of Old England. Instead of King Lear, we have Devraj, who is head of this huge company that is enmeshed in a very corrupt political world, and Taneja moves the story into this new world completely and plays a lot on more modern themes. So she looks at contemporary tensions of capitalism and geopolitics and sexuality and marriage in a way that works very effectively. It's very interesting how she addresses these topics. I'm not going to talk about them too much because I honestly don't feel like I'm qualified to. I don't know enough about the things like the Kashmir and the caste system and stuff that she references. I'm not very familiar with them. The name of the book actually comes from a line in the last speech of the play, which is by Edgar. "The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most, we that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long." Sorry, I'm not the best Shakespeare speaker. And the book is told from the perspective of the young characters in the play, which is the three daughters of Lear and the two sons of Gloucester, which in the book is Devraj and Ranjit. And these sections are interspersed with little rambling speeches from Devraj, which we come to understand are from the end of the timeline of the play. So the book sections themselves overlap or are quite separate for time frame, and then we have Devraj's sections which are moved out of their time frame, which is something that Shakespeare doesn't do in his plays. They start at the beginning and they just run through to the end. And that's an interesting thing that you can do in a book more easily than you can do in a play, so that's quite an interesting way in which Taneja has played on the structure of a play versus the structure of a book and tried to change the pace and the tension. We That Are Young sit in a long tradition of modernising Shakespeare, or using themes and storylines from Shakespeare in new contexts. If you think back to the last Shakespeare play that you went to see, I'm guessing that they weren't running around in doublets and ruffs, but they'd probably been moved into a new time frame or a different time frame that brings out a different theme of the play or has maybe more relevance to modern day audiences. Unless you're at the Globe. The Globe is all about the doublets. I think this is something that really works for Shakespeare because obviously he deals with these universal, transcendent themes that appeal to everyone. No matter who, where and when we are, we can recognise something from a lot of these plays. And King Lear is definitely no exception to that. It looks at conflicts within families, it looks at the division of power and power's divisiveness. It looks at the young overthrowing the old, whether they want to or not, in a way that never ceases to have appeal and to have relevance to us. So I think that she chose a very good play to work with. So Taneja has taken this well-known action-filled play and converted it into a book, and the big question with doing that is, how do you go about it? How do you take this story, how do you move it along, how do you maintain the pace and keep the attention of the audience, particularly an audience who already knows potentially what is going to happen? Well, just where do you go with that process? And one of the key things is, to me, and one of the key things that Taneja does, is to keep them guessing. So the play opens with the briefest of introductions of Gloucester's bastard son, Edmund, who is Jeevan in the story, and then it plunges straight into Lear's speech and this iconic scene in which Lear divides his kingdom between his 3 daughters. If you know this play at all, then you know this scene, but just in case it's been a while since you've seen it or you don't know it, I'm going to put a link in the description to an extract from a version that I saw with Simon Russell Beale, which is just a really good rendering, and it's also one where there's clips available online, for you to get a feel of the drama of that scene and how it unfolds and how it sets up the conflicts between the characters and sets up the beginning of this story in a way that grabs our attention and gets us engaged. And that is the importance of the first scene, really. It gets things started and it gets all of these interactions laid out for us as the audience. What Taneja does is she plays with our very knowledge of this scene, and it's like she's saying, I know what you're expecting to see here, but you're not going to get it. Basically, Jeevan, who is Edmund, ends up watching this scene begin to unfold on some kind of CCTV monitoring system, and as each screen flickers to life, it's like the curtains coming up on a new scene in a play, as in the stage is set. We hear in his mind exactly how each of the characters is dressed and exactly what they're doing, and we get lines like, enter Radha and Bubu, enter Devraj, and that really deliberately calls to mind stage directions so that we have this idea of the play brought to the front of our mind and we know what she's doing, we know that she's calling the play up for us. And everything that Jeevan watches is described as he sees it quite thoroughly. So we have Devraj stands at the top of the table, they all sit, and at his signal, Gaji picks up his plate. So gesture for gesture, we are seeing exactly what is unfolding in this scene. That was on page 44, by the way. In this, it's a very staged interaction, and we see it as clearly as Jeevan sees it, and as clearly as if it has been directed. It's very formal. And Jeevan is us in this scene, watching Shakespeare. He is watching something familiar but unfamiliar. He is the outsider returning to his roots. He is the other side of a cultural gulf. It's just instead of 400 years, his gulf is that he spent his youth growing up in America. So he is like us in that he recognises the people that he is watching, but he is also unknown to them. He struggles with the old language. He even thinks subtitles would really help here, which I'm sure a lot of people have felt when they've started watching the first scene of a Shakespeare play. He takes on the role of the audience, so the unseen watcher. But just as we think we're getting into the scene and we're getting to the drama, it's about to kick off, Jeevan just leaves. He'd rather get a steak sandwich than watch Devraj talk to his daughters, which makes sense for his character. But as the audience, we're left like, what a cliffhanger! Like, no, don't go! I want to see how this is going to go! And actually for the rest of this chapter, and for a lot of the book, the fact that we don't know exactly what happened, what went down in this scene between Devraj and his youngest daughter, Sita, even when we're inhabiting the minds of people who do know, people who have seen it, adds mystery and adds doubt for us, because not knowing what happened means that we don't know what we're heading towards and we don't know how the end of the book might resolve. So we get more suspense in that way. I think my favourite scene or set of scenes in this book was the storm sequence. I think it really worked in the book format as opposed to in the stage format. So that's when Lear, or rather Devraj, is wandering through this huge tempest with the Fool and Edgar, and Taneja, instead of setting it in a wilderness, sets it in this vast slum. And I found this really the most climactic part of the book and the bit that I really most enjoyed. And it's told through the eyes of Jeevan's brother, Jeet, as in Edgar. He has assumed his disguise and gone to live in this slum as opposed to becoming a madman in the wilderness. And Devraj wanders in this storm, and it is just the most luscious description of grimy, vile storminess that I have ever read, I think. It's like chaos and conflict and all of that. It's brilliant. Whereas in stage it can be really hard to achieve that, because you can just have like some lighting and some sound effects, and then just you rely on the characters saying, God, this is an awful storm, isn't it? To give the audience that feeling, whereas you can really involve them in it in a book in a way that you can't in a stage play. So that was definitely my favourite section, and the section that worked best for me. According to some authors at least, some books write themselves, but this is definitely not one of those books. It's very finely crafted and very detailed and very deliberate, I think. Taneja, from the briefest internet research, is a university professor. She's actually Dr. Preti Taneja, and Shakespeare and India is kind of her specialist subject. So it's clearly something she's very keen on, she's very knowledgeable about, and she uses that knowledge in reworking King Lear for this book. One thing that she does throughout the book that I have to acknowledge the genius of is she kind of makes Shakespeare's style her own. So Shakespeare's known for this quite flowery language, and there is definitely some flowery language in this book, and he is also, I'm not sure if known for is the right way of saying it, but he also definitely uses a lot of cultural references in that he refers to the Bible, he refers to history and classical mythology in a way that was and is inevitably at least slightly familiar to his English audience. And Taneja goes through the book and she replaces those references with references that have more cultural resonance for a book set in India. So she brings in folk tales and religious tracts and symbolism that I can only assume would spark connections and associations to people with an Indian cultural heritage. Not something I know that much about, so sometimes it is just assumption, but I'm pretty sure that's something that she's very deliberately gone and done. So this is everything from quoting Kabir to talking about certain foods or items of clothing or forms of address or birds or colours or times of year that I'm pretty sure are deliberately done in that they are references, and I just don't know about them enough to understand. One example of a recurrent symbol that Taneja introduces is the peacock. That cropped up so many times that I ended up doing some research in my Myths and Legends book and Beau's Symbols book to see what they had to say about the peacock in India, and I found a couple of things which I can only assume is what she's trying to get at. But I felt like I was probably missing quite a lot through not knowing about that, and not understanding the significance of certain things that she said probably negatively affected my enjoyment and appreciation of this story. I feel like the ideal reader of this book would sit inside kind of a huge Venn diagram where one circle is for people who have a very in-depth knowledge of King Lear, and one circle is for people who are very versant with Indian culture, both modern politics and also history and literature and all of that, and one circle is for people who read a lot of modern literary fiction and like doing a lot of analysing of it. And if you're in the middle of this Venn diagram, or even in this Venn diagram at all, you will probably really appreciate the amazingness of this book, so please read it and please get back to me with what you thought about it. The trouble is that I am just outside of this Venn diagram. This is not the kind of book that I would normally read. I don't know that much about India, and I don't have a very detailed knowledge of King Lear either. I've seen it a couple of times, but that's the limit. So because of this, I think I missed a lot, and because of missing a lot, I think my frustration with the book outweighed my enjoyment of it in quite a few places. Now, what made it so frustrating? Well, number one, no speech marks. As a reader, I find it confusing. I feel like I'm left guessing what was actually said out loud or what was part of the description of the speaker that fits in with the speech sentence. Like, maybe it makes it faster flowing or more dreamlike, or maybe it's a convention in Indian books. I know I've seen it before in some Spanish books, but it just gets on my nerves because I'd rather have it clear cut. We have punctuation specifically for denoting speech, so use it. Number two, too much untranslated other language. So there's a lot of sentences that I think must be in Hindi, or to be honest, they could be in a range of other languages. I'm not entirely sure. And I get that it adds colour and local flavour and it develops the setting and all of that. But please, 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 if you're going to put a different language in, just give me a translation. I don't care if it's in brackets or in italics or in a footnote or in a glossary, just whatever, however you do it, you need to translate it for me. And it is sometimes translated, but just not consistently, and I'm left with a lot of questions of like, what's being said here, that I don't like to be in that position. I feel like I don't mind if there's 1 or 2 words and then I can work out what they mean, or if there's a lot but it's translated, but I just can't stand it being there and not translated. It's like, I feel like I've been excluded from sections of the story. Number 3, spoilers. This book inevitably almost is a spoiler to itself. From the moment you realise that this is King Lear, you know exactly what's going to happen, and that kind of destroys a lot of the speculation you would have in any other book about plot and about how events are going to unfold. And I've said how Taneja tries to subvert this in some ways, but still there is a lot of book there to stay engaged in if you know what's going to happen. And with it being a tragedy as well, it's like, oh, I wonder how things are going to turn out for this character. Oh wait, they're going to die. So for me, that really affected my motivation to keep reading at times. I just struggled because I felt like if I was here and I knew what was going to happen here, there was just way too much in between to get through. Number 4, changing viewpoints. So at times this really worked, but at times I felt like it really didn't. So the spoiler factor doesn't matter so much if you really care about the character that you're listening to, if you feel like you're really engaged with them and what they're doing. And for me that really happened with Jeet and with a couple of the other characters to a certain extent. But the moment you get into this character and you get engaged with them, you get to like them, you just lose them and you're moved on to a completely different character, and at times that means that the character that you were with has just vanished off stage almost, and you lose them completely. And when they do come back, when they do like appear, they're a complete stranger, and by the end of the book it's like you've forgotten what it was about them that you liked, what their motivations were, you've forgotten what it's like to be inside their head, so you lose a lot of engagement with that character. And for me, every time that the book changed from character to character was an opportunity to disengage from the entire book, which might just be a personal thing, but I just struggled with it. Number 5, unanswered questions. Really? Bo's just made me a cup of tea, but he's a bit camera shy, so he's not coming into the room. Thank you for the tea. So back to number 5, unanswered questions. I feel like despite being so long and being based on a story that I already know, I was left with this story ending really abruptly, and I was left with a lot of questions like, hang on, what happened? Why did it happen? Who's dead? Who's alive? What's going on? How are they going to resolve this? And what actually led to this situation that we had at the end, because I feel like for a lot of the book, the characters are acting in a way that they are forced to act in by the play, and we don't really get any good, strong motivations for them to do what they do. It comes across as quite random, and I was waiting for this big explanation of why they suddenly went around and started killing everyone, basically, that just didn't emerge. So I was left feeling unresolved.
I'm gonna
That's
make
an
a little
interesting technique.
I'm gonna make a little wheeled trolley so that I can just push
Pass me
treats
things
into you.
without coming in. Number 6, we're really getting into quite a long list here. Number 6 is sex. I know we've all had that English teacher who highlights all of the innuendo in Shakespeare, and it is there, it's quite obvious in some places, but for a while this book is like 50 Shades of King Lolita, and I'm pretty sure that that is not in the play. Although I did see it with Sir Ian McKellen where he stripped stark naked on stage, so I guess to a certain extent it's all in the direction. I get that showing these intimate interactions can be good for character development, and these romantic liaisons can help to develop motives and conflicts between characters, but I really don't need the details of who put what where. I want a book that I can read on the bus without blushing, and for me this book overdid it quite a bit. And finally, number 7, drugs. There was just way too much intoxication and excess in this book for me. I get that there are reasons for this. She shows her characters as flawed people in a broken world who are giving in to excesses in a way that drives them to act in unpredictable and sometimes barbaric ways, and it allows the reader to experience vicariously the delights of money and pleasure and sensuality and power and everything that excess world brings. But For me, this style of writing has never worked. I lose sympathy with the characters when they become intoxicated, particularly if the story is following the mental viewpoint of someone intoxicated and they do something stupid or they start doing like illogical things. I find it hard to empathise, and I feel like this weird world and mindset that they enter into while they're on drugs is just too much of a challenge for the reader in an already complex book. I feel at times also like she's using drugs as a shorthand or an excuse for some of the brutality of the play, because like I've said, the characters are somewhat lacking in motivations to do what they do, and it's like they take these drugs and the drugs are what cause them to behave in the ways that they behave, which is not, I don't think that's a good enough set up for me. I want them to really have the motivation to do this and to be developed better as characters in a succinct way, in a succinct but complete way rather, that I feel like is lacking here, and instead it's just like, oh, I did that because I was on drugs. Wow, it feels good getting all of that off my chest. Overall, I did really enjoy parts of this book. I don't mean to have been overly critical. It has been good in places, and certain characters' viewpoints, like I've said, have been really interesting for me. As well, being set in a completely different place to a lot of the books that I read, I feel like it's opened up a new branch of understanding for me, so that has been quite fun. But overall, I found it just a little bit self-indulgent. There's too much here, it's too long, it's not been edited very well for readability. Taneja's just not held herself back at all in any part of it, but that was just my experience. I am done with this book, it's going on the shelf. I'm going to try and make my mum Roz read it because she's the one who got it for me, and I would also really like to hear what you think about it. Whether you've read it or whether you just want to respond to the concept of it, or what you think of modernising Shakespeare in general. Maybe your favourite adaptations, or maybe even which play you would adapt if you were going to adapt a play to your culture or your world. I think that would be a really interesting thing, so tell me about it on the discussion board, we can chat about it. Next I'm going to read A Note in Music by Rosamund Lehmann, this book here. I'm really looking forward to it, so I will see you soon to speak to you about that or about another book.